angle iron. Well, try I can get my hands in some angle iron. I just would have to use like, you know, use smaller like 1/4 inch bolts or whatever. It's 13 now, so I'm almost at the pickle. So then I'm gonna haul. Yeah, it was about 10:55 when I left Corey's. You know, but like I was saying, I could build a, but I'm not going to use angle iron fast. That could be a little easier. I could go buy a rack from like the Bike Hub then. You know, so then I can mount the toolbox to that, and Dad's like, well, what do you need the fucking toolbox for? Or you can use the rack for it. Like, I could use it for umpteen things. You know, I could use the rack to carry, like, let's say if I buy like something big and bulky from the dollar store, or from some, you know, whatever, and I can just boom boom tie it down. And then I'm gonna be like, I'm also gonna buy another toolbox from the dollar store. I'm gonna carry tools with me, and for when I make a cart, I'm gonna use it for, you know, use the cart for scrapping, or, you know, picking up scrap, or somebody's having a fire, you know, for picking up scrap or whatever. You know, bringing home stuff to sell, or, you know, whatever. And then I'm gonna buy, you know, maybe go to Walmart and buy my, you know, cinch straps. You know, I may buy 4, you know, so it will be two packs that I go and buy. And then I'd have to buy to eat you know, D-rings, the ones with the mounts that you could not screw to, like a trailer deck with like carriage bolts, so it's got the square hole to hold onto the head. And then you go boom, bolt it down, you drill the holes, bolt it down, done. Alrighty, I'm gonna hang it right and then go back. I'm gonna hit Smith and then go back. I had it. You know, because then I can boom, 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 you know. I'll have to figure out what carriage bolts I need or what bolts I need, because then I'm gonna ask Mom to stop at if we can run to Menards or whatever, see where they sell bolts, which I think Menards does. I'd have to see what carriage bolts I need, because then I just boom 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 mount the things on the sides, and then I got tie down points for whatever I haul if it's big. Because then like I said, I've talked in the past, I got to figure out a way to mount the toolbox for when I scrap. I got to make it quick and easy, where I don't need much tools. So I'd have to do like wing, nut, and like a 1/4 inch nut with like a wing nut type deal. Or I'd have to use my impact every time, which isn't hard, but what I do is I'd but if I have to, when I use the flat stock to mount the toolbox to it, I'm gonna put the heads of the bolts on the inside, put the nuts on the outside, then cut the excess off. Then I may flip it around and put the nuts on the inside then, and whatever. Then what I could do is cut two measure one, take one out, measure one and be like, okay, it's 4.5 inches, let's say, which is kind of long, but let's say 1.5 inches. Then I flip it around, put it on the inside, bop, 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 done. So I obviously I'd have to measure from the head out to the end where I cut. I gotta measure the overall length of the nut or the bolt. So then I cut all that, and then boom. Then I'd need really short ones for, well, I still need long, but I can just go boom, 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 cut it, and then take everything off and Loctite everything. If I don't use Nylox, so like let's say if I use a 1 inch wide piece of flat stock, I'd have to find the middle, which would be a 1/2 inch. And then I go boom. I'd have to mark a line across the thing, you know, the whole width of the flat stock, and then boom. Or what I could do is I could, when I cut, you know, drill the hole for the flat, you know, the underside, you know, to make that clamp, I could tap the other side, and I could just take one, you know, one piece out, you know, like a socket. I go bop, 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 you know, for each corner. And I could do that for the toolbox too. You know, I just got to cut everything down so it doesn't. You know, I don't hook it with my legs and cut my legs open or whatever.